fact that Conrad Murray would not tell the paramedics that he administered propofol and had been administering propofol for over 2 months. A fact that Dr. White incredulously described as something that was overlooked. That is a false, misleading statement. That is consciousness of guilt. That is Conrad Murray knowing full well what caused Michael's death. That is Conrad Murray not putting the patient first. That is Conrad Murray putting Conrad Murray first. And that is consciousness of guilt. Showing the defendant knew what had transpired. He knew of his guilt, and he was intentionally giving false and misleading statements. But as you well know, it didn't stop with the paramedics. He then continued with the emergency room doctors, never once mentioning propofol, only mentioning lorazepam. These are false, intentionally false, misleading statements when Conrad Murray, as you well know, was fully aware of what had transpired in that room, was fully aware of the information that he had an obligation as a doctor to share, and Conrad Murray failed to share that information. That is consciousness of guilt. Now, let's talk briefly about the background of this case and the background of what was going on at this time. And it will not be a lengthy discussion because I think all of you are quite familiar with the surrounding circumstances of this case and what was transpiring. But again, we know Conrad Murray had had signed an employment contract, the parties being AEG, Michael Jackson, and Conrad Murray. He had signed it, however, neither of the other parties had signed it. But we know what Conrad Murray expected to receive. What he expected to receive for his services was $150,000 a month, at least for the 10-month duration of the tour, and possibly longer. What he hoped to get for his services rendered was $150,000 a month. In a trip to London and housing in London, because again, this contract was written up and its sole purpose was for the tour, the desire of Michael Jackson to have Conrad Murray as his doctor on this tour in London. We know of Conrad Murray's intent, we know of his desire, as evidenced by the fact that he had already signed the contract, and as further evidence by the fact that he had already sent out letters to all of his patients telling them that he was taking a sabbatical because of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I had to make a most difficult decision to cease practice of medicine indefinitely. Indefinitely. This is the letter Conrad Murray sent out to his patients. He was ceasing medicine. He hit the lottery. He was going to get $150,000 a month. And he was taking it wherever it was going to take him. If it took him to Los Angeles, if it took him to London, this is what Conrad Murray was going to do. He sent out letters to all of his patients and said, I am ceasing the practice of medicine. Now, you've heard a lot about propofol, and I just want to go over a couple things briefly. Again, it's an intravenous sedative hypnotic. It's used for the induction and maintenance of anesthesia or sedation. You know where it's used, you know when it's used, and you know why it's used. What I want to talk about are the shipments and the quantity and the knowledge of Conrad Murray as these shipments continued. As these huge volumes of propofol were being shipped and continued all throughout the months, including June of 2009. We know they were all shipped to Nicole Alvarez's apartment, not to a medical office, not to a medical clinic, as Conrad Murray had relayed to Tim Lopez, but to an apartment building, left to be signed for by Nicole Alvarez, whoever else may have picked up the package,